Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour or so, then, we will see what's making the headlines with the political editors from two national newspapers, Pippa Crerar from the Daily Mirror and Harry Cole from The Sun. Great to see both of you on a very reflective day, as we'll see from the front pages. So let's start with the Metro, shall we? Focusing on the Queen's words marking the one-year anniversary of the first COVID lockdown in the UK. Front page of the Daily Mail, Boris Johnson also marks that milestone, saying the pandemic will haunt him for the rest of his life. The Prime Minister is quoted on the front of the Yorkshire Post, saying it's been a year like no other, while the Times leads on the tributes to those who have died during the pandemic. The Guardian reports on Boris Johnson's regrets over the past year, but refused to commit to a public inquiry into the government's decisions. The Daily Mirror says it's time to learn from the mistakes and urges the Prime Minister to set a date for an inquiry. Summer holidays at home again. That's the headline in the Eye as foreign trips are banned. The Sun leading on Prince Harry's new job as he takes up a post at a mental health company in California. And the FT reports that fraud at German payments company Wirecard started more than a decade before it collapsed into insolvency in 2019. So, Pippa, Harry, with their thoughts and choices, where do you start with a day like today? So much has happened to so many people, and perhaps fittingly, Pippa, many have started with the loss, with the lives lost and lives irrevocably changed, if I can say it.
Yes, and I think that for everybody that has been watching events unfold over the last year and seeing how the NHS has had to cope with the pandemic and how the government has made decisions, some of which many people feel it didn't make quick enough. Ultimately today, it feels like is the right time to think about there's 126,000 people who have died, of their families, of people whose lives have been touched by coronavirus, possibly suffering from long COVID themselves. And, you know, everybody in the country has been affected in some way or another, whether it's having to cope with the restrictions on their lives, all the way through to losing loved ones. And it really felt today that it was right to strike a sombre tone, and people were lighting candles, as front page of the Times there shows, right across the country, and marking the moment in very different and often very personal ways as well. And I just remember sitting there watching the Prime Minister's press conference a year ago today and thinking how astonishing it was that he was about to impose a national lockdown. Never for a minute did I, or no doubt many of my fellow citizens, think that we would be in the same position a year on. And I don't think any of us can really have understood at that point the full scale of the pandemic and the damage that it would inflict. Certainly looking back now, it really seems quite astonishing that so much has happened and we've had such a bleak year. But today, as most of the front pages have decided to mark in some way the memorial, really the anniversary of that first lockdown and all the lives that have been lost. And
yet, even on that date, the 23rd of March 2020, many people thought it was already too late. And the number who died that day was already extraordinary. Daily Mail chooses to focus on the Prime Minister, visibly shattered, they say, the Prime Minister's pained confession on the night the nation mourned COVID catastrophe. This will haunt me for as long as I live. I'm sure it will. There's so much to dwell on. But also for him, very soon after this, he was ill. And, you know, then not long after that, he was in hospital desperately ill, wasn't he, Harry?
Yeah, you sort of, it's one of those days where you stop and take stock. Actually, I found it quite a strange day today, actually, just writing some of the things. We sort of did a big wrap of everything. We had the Queen, the Prime Minister, you know, hundreds of people standing outside hospitals, police cars stopping traffic. You know, it felt to me like almost like it happened organically. There's sort of, you know, some of the things, the scenes we saw looked today a little bit like Remembrance Sunday, and you think that's something that sort of became a sort of organically became a day of memorial on that day. And it looks like that, you know, I suspect this is going to happen every day this year for at least a few years. I think the Prime Minister, pointed out that, this will. I don't think he actually said the word haunt, although it's in that headline. He did say, look, this will be with us for a very long time. And he wasn't just speaking personally. I think he was speaking slightly more broadly for everyone. And the 23rd of March seems just become this sort of focal point because it was such an unusual day. It was such an unusual week that back last year that I think everyone seems to have slightly just stopped and taken stock, and the usual blows and trading and political horse trading seems to have stopped for the day today. I'll be really interested to see what happens at PMQs tomorrow, whether that mood continues and there's a bit more of a sort of collegiate atmosphere in the House of Commons, or whether it's going to be a bit like Memorial Sunday, Remembrance Sunday, where everyone stops, pauses, wears their poppy, looks at that day and then carries on with their lives. I think it might take a little bit longer to get back to normal, given how fresh everything is.
Yes, and we're still in it. We're still in lockdown. No doubt people are looking forward to seeing family members next Monday, which is, the next stage of the lockdown lifting. And then they talked often about surges again, didn't they? This wall of vaccinated people, the fortifications of the vaccines programme, whether that will slow any future surges. But on to The Guardian, Johnson admits COVID regrets, rejects the clamour for a public inquiry for the moment. What did you think about the reasons they all gave about the stuff they wish they'd known? For Boris Johnson, it was the lack of understanding about asymptomatic cases. We heard them say they wish they'd had the data. They can really track the pandemic carefully now, but even across Europe, they had no real idea where it was or what it was doing. And the importation of cases as well from abroad, Italy, France, Spain, the three countries which mainly delivered the cases to the UK at that point. Did you accept all of those, Pippa, do you think, as good reasons for errors made?
I think people do understand that this was an unprecedented situation and that governments across the world were really facing some terribly difficult decisions set against a background of many, many unknowns. And of course, there were things on the scientific side, like, for example, the fact that the virus can be transmitted asymptomatically, which would have helped had they known at the time. But there were decisions made then which could have been made differently, not least the time it took the government to follow the scientific advice, which Boris Johnson likes to cite so regularly, and actually implement a lockdown. Now, even if you could give the government the benefit of the doubt and say, look, come on, this was a really, really tough situation. No politicians had to face something like this before, and say, look, the first lockdown happened and it was devastating that so many lives were lost, but it was really uncharted territory. Can you still apply that logic to the second lockdown, the second time that Boris Johnson was advised by scientists to shut down the economy and to get children out of schools in order to prevent a further surge in case numbers? And he resisted it for quite a long time. And in fact, we ended up, partly because of the pressure brought to bear by the Treasury and Rishi Sunak, of only having a 4-week lockdown, which effectively was a circuit breaker. And I don't know whether it really had that much impact on case numbers. Then we saw the second wave. And of course, more than half of the deaths that have taken place since November. And, how many of those might have been preventable if different decisions were made. So, I think that there will be public understanding. There is public understanding that in the early days of the pandemic, it was really uncharted territory and terribly difficult for anyone. The early lessons weren't learned when it came to making similar decisions later on. And I think that's why there's this clamour for a public inquiry sooner rather than later, because rather than saying, OK, let's look at this in 2 years' time when there's no cases left at all, you look at some of the lessons that should be learnt now and that actually could end up saving lives as we go forward through the rest of this year, potentially with the third wave coming in from Europe.
Yes, the Mirror asking that same question as well. The idea of lessons needing to be learnt, time to learn from the mistakes, they say there. And there's certainly some big decisions coming if we look at the eye, Harry, namely for many people about foreign travel, not just holidays, visiting relatives who may live abroad, whatever reason you need to travel. There are many. There will be some really big decisions next month, won't there, about what they do about this?
Yeah, I think the sort of alarm bells went for anyone hoping for a quick getaway or a quick quick leaving this country without having to go through a huge amount of quarantine and process and paperwork and valid reasons and the like. Will be slightly unnerved by the fact that Boris Johnson has said tonight at the press conference that he will be announcing the review on April the 5th. We were all expecting it to be a little bit later than that, April the 12th, with a view to perhaps it coming in May. These changes. The fact he's bringing it forward makes me think that it's not particularly good news for travellers. certainly to Europe, there's a sort of painfully denied, but nonetheless growing speculation that France may have to go onto the red list, which means that visitors will have to not only quarantine for 10 days, but do so in a hotel at their own cost. Look, you just have to look at the numbers in Europe. You have to look at the reaction of the European Union. You have to look at the reaction of the European leaders. This is not a continent that's going in the right way. And as the PM and Chris Whitty have been at pains to, excuse me, at pains to point out what happens in Europe. Excuse me.
You have to shout, it's not COVID when you cough, don't you?
It's not a symptom. I was working very late and I ran in just before I came on air and ate some peanuts, and I'm suffering. As Chris Whitty has been at pains to point out, what happens in Europe tends to happen, all the way through this pandemic 3 weeks later in Britain. Now, you could argue that we've already had our second, third wave, whatever you will call it, and this is that Europe catching up with the Kent variant and all sorts of matters at play, but things are very worried. And, I think that Matt Hancock in particular has been very keen to push this idea of Britain open internally, free to move around in the country, pubs, restaurants reopened, but borders closed.
Okay, Harry,
and I feel like the debate is going that way towards Matt Hancock's vision.
I could talk about that all night, to be fair, but we are running out of time. But we will see you in a few moments. After this break, we will come back with Working 9 to 5. Prince Harry takes up a new job. More on that after the break.
Journalism is under attack.
He's clearly marked as press.
A riot has actually been declared.
You have to have the facts.
I will stand in the way of the enemy.
You have to have the evidence on camera, because people are doubting everything.
You are further pushing the agenda that is condemning all of us.
To prove a wrong. To expose corruption. To show the truth.
They just want to celebrate.
I don't think any journalist wants anything more than that.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
More flares going off, a volley of rocks, cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why?
Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, the political editors from two national papers, Pippa Crerar from the Mirror, Harry Cole from the Sun. Welcome back to both of you. Your story in the Sun. Tell us more. This is Priti Patel, Harry.
Yeah, so never one to shy away from a fight. I think Priti Patel tomorrow will cross the road and start multiple fights. Fresh on the back of her policing bill clampdown, we have something in the pipeline called the Sovereign Borders Bill, which is going to be spicy to say the least. In it, she is looking at new ways to stop illegal immigrants crossing the channel in small boats. She is starting a fairly controversial and punchy fight with the legal establishment over their use of sort of court time on hopeless appeals for migrants, and she's not shying away from the fight. We've interviewed her in the paper tomorrow, and she's laying the groundwork for what should be a fairly incendiary intervention tomorrow. And I have to say, she seems to be slightly reveling in it. This is all in the sort of Tory manifesto. She feels that this is what the government have been elected to do. She thinks she's got the public on her side. But if my Twitter mentions over the last few days sort of teeing some of this stuff up and to go by, there's going to be lots of screaming from the commentariat.
Yeah, we will look out for that announcement, obviously. Front page of The Sun, though, a Sun employment issue, or special. The job description for Prince Harry's new role, Pippa.
Yes, so Prince Harry has sort of stuck to his word and got a job, and is going to be supporting himself and his family from now on, and he's going to become Chief Impact Officer at a US coaching and mental health firm. And I think the Wall Street Journal broke this story earlier in the day, and it's very LA, isn't it? I mean, it very much fits with his new LA lifestyle. I mean, does anyone know here what a Chief Impact Officer is? Certainly in the corporate world, I believe it's actually quite rare, and you're more likely to find somebody with that title in for example, charity, something like Amnesty International or something. But it does very much fit with sort of, the sort of LA, in fact, I think even they're San Francisco, aren't they? But sort of Californian lifestyle. And he's going to be getting involved in product strategy decisions in the charity side of the firm, and he's going to be a public advocate really on topics including mental health, which is, as we all know, he's done a huge amount of advocacy on anyway. So, there's a sort of a school of thought that he just needs to turn up and he'll be doing his job. But certainly there's lots of people watching to see how he's getting on.
Indeed so. Self-optimisation, I can barely say it, let alone know what it is. But, there are mixed views on this, are there not? Harry, you've got sort of 5 seconds to give me your overall feeling.
The poor boy was apparently cut off financially, so it's good to see him pulling up his bootstraps and getting an honest day's work. But it does sound a little bit like a load of LA tech woke mumbo jumbo to me.
We'll see you at 11:30. Thank you both.
For the early risers.
As we examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers, the curious, and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.